So I'm about to read this book. So this book, let me just read this little shit on the back so you understand what we're getting into. But it says Satanism is often misunderstood as a religion that worships an evil prince of darkness. But in reality, modern Satanists are nonviolent and consider the devil to be a positive metaphor for the pursuit of knowledge, reason, and justice. A window into the fascinating culture and practices of Satanists, the Little Book of Satanism details the devil's footprint on historic events over the centuries and dispels misconceptions about ritual abuse and serial killers. In addition to contextualizing the core values of practitioners, the accessible guide covers Satan's biblical origins, historical Satanism from witch trials to the Satanic Panic, the Church of Satan and the Satanic Temple, the devil in pop culture, symbols and rituals. So that's what this, you know what I'm saying? Why is this crooked? Anyway, this the book. What's up, Disposable Hero? What's up, Kelly? Kelly! That's the book. What's going on, David, my moderator? Once again in this bitch, you know. So let's get into it. That's the introduction. Hold up. Let me get it right. Ha! Apparently not, son. In the popular imagination, Satan plays out like a scene from a B horror movie. Picture ghoulish figures in black cloaks chanting "Hail Satan" as they conduct a blood sacrifice on a pentagram for the Prince of Darkness. Some church leaders and conspiracy theorists insist that a cabal of literal devil worshippers is lurking in the shadows, wishing nothing more than to rain torment upon innocents in pursuit of an insidious world-dominating agenda. In reality, the practice of Satanism is far removed from these lurid fantasies. Modern Satanists, like myself, are non-violent and for the most part non-theistic, meaning they don't believe in the actual existence of the devil. Rather, Satan, the fallen angel who defied God, is a metaphor for the revolt against superstition and arbitrary authority. Like the anti-hero of Paradise Lost, Satanists proudly identify as outsiders who dare to stand up for knowledge, reason, and justice. The Little Book of Satanism aims to dispel the widespread misconceptions and conspiracy theories about Satanists. Starting from the devil's earliest origins, I detail the mark of the beast on cultural and historical movements over the centuries, which have informed the sincerely held beliefs and practices of Satanists today. Time and time again, the goat-headed one has been made the scapegoat for social issues from medieval witch trials to the 1980 Satanic Panic. Modern Satanists, however, have flipped the script by associating the devil with a positive and meaningful religious identity. We Satanists take very different journeys on what is considered the left-hand path. Some are members of the two most prominent organizations, the Church of Satan and the Satanic Temple. I am of the Satanic Temple. Others belong to small groups or have an individualized practice based on a variety of source material. Practitioners also express their sincere religious identification in diverse ways, with some engaging in rituals or community activism. I engage more in community activism. Rather than try to narrowly define a true Satanism, this book invites you to understand the motivations and affirmative values that are consistent among many self-declared modern Satanists. These include rejecting irrational dogma, tyrannical authority, and conventional moral judgments. Championing nonconformity, empathy, and personal expression, including elements considered transgressive by the status quo. Pursuing knowledge through a rational, science-based approach that rejects superstition. Relating to the figure of Satan as a meaningful symbol of individuality and rebellion. And also engaging in some form of satanic doctrine, practice, community, or organization. This being a little book, It will be impossible to cover all the variations of the movement, including theistic Satanists and outliers with more esoteric beliefs. Instead, I focus on the themes and individuals most relevant to Satanism as it is generally expressed today. As the saying goes, the devil is in the details, so if a subject piques your interest, I encourage you to examine it further through the sources in the selected bibliography. Now is the time to discard malevolent stereotypes about Satanists and take a truthful look at the history and ideas of the movement through the ages. In the spirit of Lucifer the adversary, I hope you'll be inspired by Satanism's affirmative values that courageously oppose injustice and speak up for nonconformity, free inquiry, and personal liberty. Ave Satanas. Part 1. Please allow me to introduce myself. The devil's predecessors. For as long as humans have been able to tell one another stories, there have been tales of malevolent and chaotic spirits. The world was full of distressing events that people could not understand, whether it was famine, by blight, or death from mysterious internal causes. To explain life's most fearful elements, cultures worldwide oh shit. My bad. Anyway, where were we? To explain life's most feared elements, cultures worldwide developed the idea of superhuman beings that sometimes preyed on humanity and engineered misfortunes. As a means of countering these malicious forces, many invoked protection from benevolent gods through prayers and rituals. Such early spiritual traditions also helped uphold the social order. Whenever there was conflict, those in power could put the blame on demons. Cultures and religions around the globe have long imagined devil-like figures, from the Mayan death gods that lorded over a frightful underworld to China's Yanlao Wang, who judged the deceased before the gates of hell. The roots of Satanism, however, are embedded in the character of Satan in Judeo-Christian theology. But the Prince of Darkness wasn't created in a vacuum. His conceptualization drew from numerous faiths and folklores, and these influences were crossbred and elaborated over the centuries to form the devil we know today. In particular, the religions of the ancient Near East directly shaped the development of the biblical Satan. Babylonian and Canaanite myths spoke of a creator god who battled a sea monster, and a variation of this narrative later appeared in the biblical tale of Leviathan. The Egyptians had a rich pantheon of morally ambiguous deities, meaning that each god had qualities of both good and evil. Set, the god of violence and disorder, skewed closer to the latter and likely inspired the personification of Satan. Ancient Egyptians also conceived of a hell-like underworld called Duat, where souls were judged after death. Jackal-headed Anubis weighed human hearts against the feather, and those that were heavier were tortured and consumed by fire or hungry demons. Likewise, the ancient Greeks had morally ambiguous gods and believed that the dead were ferried across the river Styx to the subterranean abode of Hades. Many of Satan's visual qualities can be traced to Pan, the goat-like god of fertility and shepherds who indulged in carnal pleasures in the wild. Perhaps the devil's closest forebear comes from Zoroastrianism, which is the oldest recorded religion to conceive of the world in dualist terms, the external opposition of good versus evil and heaven versus hell. The Persian prophet Zoroaster, or Zarathustra, taught of a supreme creator god, Ahura Mazda, which stood for goodness and light and was supported by heavenly deities. His antithesis was the destructive Angra Mainyu, or Ahriman, who dwelled in darkness with his demonic army and sometimes appeared in the form of a snake. Zoroastrianism taught that humans had free will and could choose which of the two to follow. Those who hailed Ahriman were doomed to fall into an eternal darkness of bad food and lamentation. Satan's genesis in the Bible. Over time, the pantheon of dark spiritual let me start over. Over time, the pantheon of dark spiritual progenitors directly and indirectly contributed to the emergence of the Judeo-Christian Satan. Although the concept of the devil came to be integral to Christian interpretations of the Bible, it is difficult to find a coherent description of his biography, personality, and role in its books. Rather, Satan's story was assembled over the millennia as theologians and writers scoured the scattered references and biblical passages and reinterpreted them through the lenses of other doctrines and legends. Satan makes his debut in the texts that ended up forming the Hebrew Bible, or Tanakh, which was written approximately between 1200 and 165 BCE. In these early works, he is not the powerful ruler of hell, but merely an angelic servant of Yahweh, the God of Israel and Judah. Satan's name is derived from the Hebrew root sin. Sten, it's like S-T-N, which refers to one who acts as an adversary or accuser. Rather than describing an individual named Satan, the Hebrew Bible used the noun Hasatan, the Satan, to mean an adversary, as well as to describe any angel in an oppositional role. In the book of Numbers, Yahweh sends the Satan to block the path of Balaam, a non-Israelite prophet who embarks on a journey in opposition to divine will. The angelic emissary blocks the path of Balaam's donkey, which bolts off the path and lies down to avoid the invisible nemesis. Since Balaam cannot see Hasatan, the prophet grows angry and whips his animal for being a smartass. That's when the Satan reveals himself and explains his divine role as an adversary. Awed, Balaam repents and agrees to do as the Lord commands. In the book of Job, Hasatan is an officer in Yahweh's heavenly council and demonstrates his role as an objector for the first time. The Satan questions whether the devout and prosperous Job is serving the Lord only because the man is blessed with divine favor. With the Lord's permission, the Satan tests Job's faith by taking his wealth, killing his children in a mighty wind, and inflicting sores all over his body. Despite his immense suffering, Job stays loyal to God, and his good fortune is restored, proving Hasatan wrong. Satan becomes a proper name in the New Testament, which was written approximately between 50 and 100 ACE. The scriptures describe a single adversary who still operates under divine control, but now has a greater and more powerful role as the enemy of Jesus Christ and humankind. The devil appears to the Son of God during his fast in the wilderness and tempts him to turn stones into loaves of bread. Later, the devil takes Jesus to a mountaintop and promises Jesus worldly power if he bows down to Satan. Each time, Jesus calls out, "Away with you, Satan," and banishes his tempter. The book of Revelation gives the fullest account of Satan as the harbinger of evil, portraying him through the terrifying visions of the apocalyptic war that he wages against God and his angels. The devil appears in the hideous form of a great red dragon and gives authority to a beast that comes from the sea and one that comes from the earth. The latter has 2 horns and is described as the false prophet associated with the number 666, which most people think it is the devil's number. 666 was the number of the beast and works out in Hebrew numerology to signify Nero, the cruel Roman emperor who persecuted early Christians. At the end of Revelation, the archangel Michael conquers Satan and casts him down from heaven. The devil is bound for 1,000 years, then is briefly set free and wages a final battle against God. Ultimately, Satan and his demons are defeated and hurled into the lake of fire and brimstone to spend eternity there. Satan's character is barely sketched out in the Bible. Many now widespread ideas about his origins and evildoings were developed later through extra-biblical texts, theological treatises, and folk and morality tales. For instance, in the Jewish tradition, the cunning serpent that tempts Eve is simply a talking snake. However, starting in the 1st century CE, some Christians reinterpreted the book of Genesis to suggest that the serpent was the devil in disguise, enticing Adam and Eve to taste the fruit from the tree of knowledge. This retroactive reading of the scriptures helps explain a paradox. If God is omnipotent and wholly good, then why is there suffering in the world that he made and has the power to change? Christians can come to terms with this contradiction by blaming Satan for leading innocents astray. Since humans have free will, they may decide to follow the devil into wickedness. However, Christians believe Satan is not God's equal and can operate only within the limits set forth by his divine will. In other words, God allows the villain to amuse himself on earth for some time, but the devil will inevitably be conquered and confined to hell. In contrast to this dominant narrative, a modern Satanist can consider the same Genesis passages and metamorphically interpret them from an empowering feminist point of view. This alternative reading suggests that Eve considered herself equal to her husband and sought knowledge unfairly denied to her by God. By courageously eating the fruit, she refused to be subjugated by arbitrary authority. From this perspective, Eve should be commended for listening to the devil's wise words and standing up for herself rather than being disparaged for her original sin. Besides the devil himself, there are a few other figures from the Judeo-Christian tradition who are linked to Satanism. The Antichrist, Jesus' archenemy, is mentioned in the New Testament's first and second epistles of John, and his life story is elaborated in early medieval treatises. There it is. Generally, the Antichrist is considered to be an incarnation of Satan or his son or the chief of his army. The false prophet presents himself as the Messiah, deceives humanity, and reigns over the world for a short time until he is defeated in the second coming of Christ. Lilith, a female demon in Judaic folklore, is known as Adam's first wife, who refused to lie beneath him. Other legends say she defied her husband and coupled with the archangel Samael, or became the consort of Satan. In the late 19th century, some writers and philosophers hailed Lilith for her independence and unabashed sexuality. Today, many Satanists consider her a positive female symbol, obviously. Islam originated in the 7th century, and some of its theology can be traced to Judaism and Christianity. The Quran portrays Iblis, or Shaitan, leader of grotesque demons and tempter of humans, as a minor irritant to Allah and was condemned to hell for disobedience. Later, Iblis received permission from Allah to try to mislead Adam and his descendants, but never had power over them. Islam also has an archangel figure called the Dajjal, a deceitful messiah who is blind in his right eye. It's important to note that most Satanists do not believe in the existence of any of these supernatural figures, let alone worship them. Regardless, Satanists may find insight in a diabolical analysis of biblical materials that refutes the Christian narrative that many grew up with. Rereading the scriptures can help them contextualize a universe that felt imposed upon them and find resolve in the devil and his infernal comrades. What is Satan's name? The Hebrew root of Satan was usually translated in Greek to diabolos, accuser or slanderer. When diabolos was eventually translated into English, the devil was spawned. Today, in common usage, Satan and the devil are used interchangeably. Around the 1st century, Lucifer became known as Satan's primordial name before he was cast out of heaven. A passage from the book of Isaiah refers to the fall of a king of Babylon. How are you fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn, to the depths of the pit? When translated into Latin from the Greek version of the Old Testament, day star or morning star becomes Lucifer or bringer of light. Theologians link these two lines to a comment from Jesus in Luke. Quote, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven, forming a backstory about how Lucifer and his rebel angels staged a failed coup against God. Much later, the 19th century Romantic writers found inspiration in the tale and reframed it to depict Satan as a glorious anti-hero who rose up against the tyranny of heaven. In the Middle Ages, however, Lucifer was sometimes treated as an entity separate and distinct from the devil. Later, some 19th and 20th century esoteric groups saw Lucifer as a positive entity and Satan as a negative one, or thought the two represented different human tendencies. Some modern Satanists make similar distinctions and prefer to self-identify as Luciferians. But for the most part, Lucifer is identified as the prideful Satan in the Bible and in literature about his fall from heaven. Here is where the story gets complicated. The devil is associated with other infernal names, some of which are conflated with dark mythological figures from the ancient Near East. Perhaps you may have heard of Beelzebub, Lord of the Flies, Leviathan, Mephistopheles, and Belial. Different texts, the Bible, medieval plays, demonic grimoires, have differing or fluid conceptions of these diabolical names and their relations to one another. There aren't enough pages in this book to go through the etymology of each one, so suffice it to say that the appellations are sometimes used to specify Satan's alter egos, but usually refer to his demonic agents or lieutenants. The main idea communicated by these names is that malevolent spirits were organized behind an evil leader and went into the world under his command to wreak havoc. Speak of the devil, Satan's many names. The devil, Lucifer, Beelzebub, Leviathan, Mephistopheles, Mammon, Mastema, Belial, Baal, Azazel, Abaddon, Apollyon, Asmodeus, Astaroth, Prince of Darkness, Father of Lies, the Deceiver, Old Horny, Old Scratch, Old Nick, Old Harry. What does Satan look like? To dress as Satan for Halloween, a person would likely put on red face and horns, tie on a cape, attach a long barbed tail, and hold a pitchfork. But the devil has as many faces as he has names, and his visual identity reflects the ways humans have contemplated him over time. The Bible does not detail Satan's appearance, so artists from the early Middle Ages drew from a variety of sources in envisioning his physical features. The book of Revelation does describe Satan's incarnation as a scarlet dragon with horns, qualities that have become signatures of Old Horny. Set, the devil's Egyptian antecedent, was similarly associated with serpents and depicted in red to convey the scorching heat of the desert. With his lolling tongue and snakes issuing from his body, a minor Egyptian fertility god named Bes may have also provided inspiration. The first known depiction of Satan is a mosaic from the year 520 CE at Saint Apollinaire Nuovo in Ravenna, Italy. Portrayed as a hallowed angel, he sits to the left of Jesus with a group of goats before him. An angel sits on Christ's right behind a flock of sheep. The work references the Gospel of Matthew's avowal that Jesus will separate the sheep from the goats on Judgment Day. The horned beast represents sin and disobedience, so they are sent to Satan's side. For this reason, Satan is often shown with goats, or as a horned and hooved deity. The connection is strengthened by the book of Leviticus, which describes how a goat took on the sins of the Israelis and was thrown over a cliff, becoming the first scapegoat. Medieval artists thought the devil was cut from the same cloth as the Greek pastoral god Pan, so they drew him as a similarly lecherous and hairy beast. Cernunnos, the lustful Celtic god of the forest, may have also influenced representations of the horned one. Finally, Satan is associated with the goat-like Baphomet, whom we'll meet in the following section. As for the devil's pitchfork, it is reminiscent of the trident used by Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea. The 10th century Myriodox High Cross, located in a ruined monastery in Ireland, is possibly the first carving to show Satan using a pitchfork to herd the damned into hell and torture them. Peasants would have been able to identify with this pastoral imagery, as they used similar tools to prod their farm animals. Most people were illiterate in the Middle Ages, as I'm coming off the way I'm struggling to read this. But anyway. And so they learned about Christian doctrine from carvings, stained glass, and mosaics. By giving a face to the deceiver, church leaders were able to personify and communicate the abstract notion of evil and reinforce a belief in the devil. They encouraged artists to depict Satan as the frightening opposite of the beatific God, a screaming and sensual beast sheathed in darkness, typically with bat wings, fur, fangs, claws, horns, and hooves. For example, in their 15th century Last Judgment triptychs, Giotto fra Angelico and Hans Memling painted the devil as a black-skinned monster devouring lost souls who tumbled into hellfire. With the dawn of the Enlightenment, a 17th and 18th century movement that valued science and rationality, most people no longer thought of Satan as an immediate manifestation of supernatural power to be feared in daily life. Instead, many artists drew him as a rebel that stood valiantly against ecclesiastical authority. 19th century artists Eugene Delacroix and William Blake showed their sympathy for the devil by illustrating him as a classic muscled hero. Other art from this time depicted Satan in the form of a kind old man or a dandy trickster. The devil was also imagined as a sexually attractive figure, notably in Guillaume Guiffe's 1848 sculpture Lucifer of Liège. The toned and bat-winged angel is nearly naked and runs a hand seductively through his long hair. Today, Satan's iconography runs the gamut of influences from past centuries, and he may even take on cute or kitschy forms. I'm going to stop there because now we're going to get into the symbols of Satanism, and I got a headache, so I'm going to end it there, son. Tomorrow we'll get into what are the symbols of Satanism. Thank you guys for following along, and hail Satan.